My husband put his mom in business class on our honeymoon and left me in economy, so I exposed them in the airport lounge. I'm 33, and my husband Jasper is 36. We tied the knot not too long ago, after being together for about 4 years. We've been engaged for the past 8 months before we finally got married. I first met Jasper when I was 29. Back then, I was managing a bar, and he was a regular customer. He'd come in pretty often, and one day, we struck up a conversation. Not long after that, he asked me out. I turned him down initially, but that didn't stop him. He kept showing up, always finding some excuse to talk to me. My co-workers used to tease me about it, saying how cute it was that he kept trying. Eventually, I figured, what the heck, I gave him a chance. And, well, here we are. The rest is history. Jasper's honestly an amazing guy. He's sweet, thoughtful, emotionally mature, financially stable, and he takes the lead in planning our dates. He's got so many great qualities. But if there's one thing that's been hard to deal with, it's his mom, Sierra. Now, don't get me wrong. When I first met Sierra, I actually really liked her. I truly did. Let me give you some background so you can understand where I'm coming from. Jasper was just 13 when his parents split up. His dad, Miles, had an affair with a woman he worked with, and naturally, that shattered Sierra. They'd been college sweethearts, so you can imagine how devastating that must have been. Miles begged her for another chance. He said he'd never been with anyone else before and didn't know how to handle things. But Sierra didn't budge. She filed for divorce. What Miles did was undeniably wrong, no question there. But Jasper was still a kid and couldn't really grasp all of it. Watching his parents break up broke his heart. After the divorce, Jasper lived with his mom during the week for school and spent the weekends with his dad. Despite the cheating, Miles actually stepped up and was a solid father. He showed up to all of Jasper's games and school meetings, supported him, and most importantly, he let Jasper be himself. Sierra, on the other hand, was extremely strict, maybe as a reaction to everything she'd been through. Jasper's told me about some of the rules she had for him growing up, and honestly, they were over the top. No staying out late with friends, no dating, no school trips or picnics, no being around water, and absolutely no sleepovers. At first, I thought he was exaggerating. But he explained that she always framed it like she was just trying to protect him or that she was too lonely without him around. It didn't take Jasper long to realize he preferred staying at his dad's place. Miles wasn't nearly as controlling. The only real rule he had was that Jasper needed to check in and share his location if he went out, just so Miles could be sure he was safe. Whenever a class trip came up, Sierra would flat out forbid it. But Miles would go ahead and sign the permission slip behind her back, encouraging Jasper to go have fun. That always led to heated arguments between Sierra and Miles. She'd threatened to take him to court over things like that. If Jasper wanted to hang out with his friends, his mom would just say no. So, he'd wait until the weekend rolled around, and then he'd finally get to go out to grab a bite, catch a concert, be a regular kid for a while. As he hit his teenage years, the tension between him and Sierra only got worse. They'd constantly argue. She criticized how he dressed, how he styled his hair, and even who he hung out with. He started spending most of his time holed up in his room, just waiting for the weekend so he could escape to his dad's. When Jasper was 17, Miles introduced him to his now wife, Grant. She's a kind woman, and she's always treated Jasper like he was her own. Grant had struggled with infertility earlier in life and had eventually come to terms with not having kids. So when she met Miles and found out he had a son, she was genuinely happy. Grant ended up becoming a second mom to Jasper, and he really grew to love her. But Sierra? She couldn't handle it. She didn't want another woman taking any kind of maternal role in her son's life. She and Jasper had huge blowouts over it. She even went as far as telling him that Grant had probably been Miles's mistress all along, even though that wasn't true. Grant came into the picture way after Miles and Sierra were divorced. Still, Sierra wouldn't accept that. She started making it harder and harder for Miles to see Jasper. She told Jasper he couldn't go over there anymore because Grant was a stranger and might be dangerous. That led to more ugly fights between her and Miles. When Jasper turned 18, he was finally considered an adult. He'd gotten accepted into 2 different universities. But Sierra pressured him hard to choose the one near her house, so she could drop by and visit him every weekend. Thing is, that school didn't offer much in the field he was interested in. He talked to his dad about it, and Miles told him to go with what felt right, not what anyone else wanted. But Jasper was scared to disappoint his mom. Eventually, though, he decided to follow his gut and chose the university that was farther away. That decision triggered one of Sierra's worst meltdowns. She accused him of abandoning her, said all men were the same, and even threatened to kick him out. She told him she wouldn't pay a dime toward his tuition unless he chose the school she picked. Jasper ended up calling his dad, and Miles came right away to help him pack up his things and move in with him. Jasper told me that Sierra hurled some pretty awful insults at both of them as they left. That was the last image he had of her before they drove off. In the end, Jasper did go to the school he wanted. Miles promised to help cover what he could, and Jasper took out a small student loan for the rest, something manageable that he could pay off later. After he left for college, Jasper stopped talking to his mom altogether. Even after Jasper left for college and cut off contact with his mom, she didn't let up. She kept texting him nonstop. Some days she'd apologize, and other days she'd blame him for ruining her life. Jasper admitted to me later that he did miss her a lot during that time, but he couldn't handle the emotional roller coaster all over again. Meanwhile, Miles stayed in regular contact with him. They'd catch up during holidays and breaks. Then, in Jasper's second year of college, he got a call that shook him to his core. It was from the hospital. They told him his mother had attempted to take her own life. He immediately rang up his dad, and the two of them rushed to be by her side. That's when Sierra was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and depression. The hospital kept her under supervision for 72 hours. It was a major turning point for Jasper. He broke down, blaming himself for what she had done. He spent those hours sitting at her bedside, begging for her forgiveness and praying she would recover. After she was discharged, she was put on medication, and Jasper made a promise right then and there that he would never abandon her again. From that point on, he stayed in constant contact with her. Once college was over, he made the decision to move back to his hometown. He still had his own apartment, but he chose a place close to her so he could be there if she ever needed anything, which, unsurprisingly, she took full advantage of. Since that hospital incident, Jasper's been stuck in this constant state of guilt and anxiety when it comes to his mom. He sees her as incredibly fragile, and even if he disagrees with what she says, he still listens. It's like he's afraid that saying no could push her over the edge again. When Jasper opened up to me about all of this, I was sympathetic. I truly was. I figured since she was going to therapy and keeping up with her checkups, maybe she was on the path to healing. The first time I met Sierra, she came across as sweet, at least at first. But she'd make these offhand comments that caught me off guard. She'd mention things about my height, skin color, or weight, like, "You might want to drop a few pounds to keep your man interested," or, "Jasper's so fair, maybe your baby will take after him." She'd say Jasper deserved only the best, that he shouldn't be in the kitchen doing chores, or that he could have done better than me but decided to settle. Yeah, those comments stung. But I brushed them off. I told myself not to let it get to me, and I kept things polite. But as my relationship with Jasper got more serious, I started seeing how deeply her emotional issues were affecting him. She'd call every morning to check if he had eaten breakfast. And if he missed her call, she'd blow up his phone until he answered. After I moved in with Jasper, she even started calling me, asking why her son wasn't picking up. She'd hint that I was trying to come between them. Jasper would cancel our dates or bail on events last minute, saying his mom wasn't feeling well and needed him. If he won an award at work and got to bring a +1, it had to be her, not me. Otherwise, she'd have a complete meltdown. Whenever we planned a trip, Sierra would insist he share his location with her so she could sleep peacefully at night. All of this made me deeply uncomfortable. I could see how torn Jasper was. On one side, he craved a normal, peaceful life with me, but on the other, he was terrified of pushing his mom too far. It felt like he was constantly walking on eggshells. Now, Jasper's dad, Miles? He was the complete opposite. So relaxed and warm. I'd met him and Grant several times, and they were always kind and welcoming. They never asked us nosy questions or made me feel small. Miles showed genuine interest in getting to know me, and I could see that Jasper had picked up some of those good traits from him. That's probably a big reason why I stayed by Jasper's side. I could see the man he truly was beneath all the mess his mom had put him through. I knew he needed help too, and I gently encouraged him to talk to someone, maybe try therapy. But every time I brought it up, he'd just say he was fine. Then, Jasper proposed. It caught me completely off guard, in the best way possible. It turned out to be one of the happiest days of my life. He'd flown in my parents and even brought my best friend into town as a surprise. It was such a thoughtful gesture. Miles and Grant were there too, and they were over the moon for us. The only person missing was Sierra. Jasper told me she wasn't feeling well. And honestly, I was relieved. The last thing I wanted was for her to say something inappropriate in front of my parents and ruin the moment. We were all having a blast, enjoying the celebration, when Jasper's phone rang. It was the hospital again. They said his mom had fallen down the stairs. We all rushed over to check on her, but once we got there, Sierra refused to see anyone except Jasper. She didn't want me or anyone else in the room. That rubbed me the wrong way. I mean, we'd all shown up out of concern. Still, it wasn't the right time to speak up, so I stayed quiet. When Jasper came back out, he said the doctor confirmed it was a fracture and that she'd have to stay the night. Miles offered to stay with her, saying she'd probably just sleep most of the time anyway, and Jasper should take me home. But Jasper shook his head. He said Sierra wouldn't be okay with that and he didn't want to upset her any further. So, we all headed back, and my parents and best friend helped me clean up. Jasper had booked hotel rooms for them, but they decided to stay with me instead. I think they could all tell I was disappointed. I mean, it was the night of my engagement, and I wasn't going to spend it with my fiancé. That should have been my first big clue that things were only going to get harder from here. Once we started planning the wedding, everything became about what Sierra wanted. She tried to control everything, from the dress I wore, to who our flower girl should be, to the suit Jasper picked out. She even had strong opinions on the guest list, the venue, every little detail. Jasper and I had always dreamed about honeymooning in Hawaii. We talked about it for ages. But Sierra kept insisting we shouldn't go that far just for a honeymoon, that it made more sense to stay somewhere nearby. That was the moment I decided enough was enough. I finally put my foot down and told Sierra, flat out, no. She looked genuinely shocked, like she couldn't believe I'd actually said that to her. She told me I was being disrespectful, that I had no right to speak to her that way. But I stood my ground and told her this honeymoon was about Jasper and me, not her, and we were going to decide where we wanted to go. Right then, she burst into tears. She told Jasper I was pushing her away, that I was excluding her and trying to turn him against his own mother. She accused me of stealing her son from her, which was honestly just absurd. I reminded her that I had already compromised on a ton of things for the wedding, her choice of officiant, the venue she wanted, the cake, even what colors the bridesmaids could wear. I had been trying to include her where I could. But I drew the line at letting her choose where we were going for our honeymoon. Jasper, caught in the middle like always, tried to reason with her. But Sierra made it sound like she was some kind of saint sacrificing everything, including her son, for the sake of his happiness. Later, I even texted her an apology because I knew how much she meant to Jasper. But her response? She told me no woman could ever take her son away from her, and that I needed to learn my place. I showed the message to Jasper right away. He called her up, trying to make sense of it, and instead of owning up to what she said, she twisted it around. She claimed I was trying to stir up trouble between them, and that he should love and trust her more than me. I told Jasper how that message made me feel, how deeply uncomfortable it was, and to my relief, he agreed with me. He promised we'd stick to our original plan. We were going to Hawaii, just like we'd always talked about. That meant the world to me. For once, it felt like Jasper was finally standing up to her, choosing our life together over his mom's emotional blackmail. And just knowing we'd be away from her watchful eyes for a little while was the best gift I could have asked for. The wedding itself went smoothly, no major drama, at least on the surface. But at the reception, Sierra just couldn't help herself. She gave this long, emotional speech all about her own struggles and sacrifices. It felt like she was trying to pull the spotlight back onto herself on our wedding day. Still, I chose to focus on the good. My parents were there, Miles and Grant were incredibly warm, and all the guests had a blast. We danced late into the night. And in the back of my mind, I kept holding on to the thought that Jasper and I were finally heading to Hawaii soon. It gave me something to look forward to. The morning of our honeymoon, I woke up thrilled. I was practically buzzing with excitement as Jasper and I got ready for the airport. I dreamed of this for so long. But when we got to the airport, something caught me completely off guard. Jasper had booked himself a business class seat and put me in economy. This was news to me. I would have gladly paid for business class if I'd known. But Jasper had insisted on planning the whole trip himself, and I just assumed we'd be sitting next to each other. When I asked him about it, he said he'd gotten a last-minute deal and couldn't find another seat for me in business. But the way he avoided eye contact made me feel like something was off. He brushed it off, saying it was just a few hours and not a big deal. So I told him, fine, if it wasn't a big deal, he could fly economy and I'd take the business seat. That's when he got irritated. He kept telling me not to be so sensitive and said he'd meet me after the flight. I asked where he was going, and he told me he was headed to the business lounge. At that point, I was confused and hurt. His cold attitude, the seat switch, it just didn't sit right. I sat alone in the waiting area, fighting the urge to cry. I didn't want to start our honeymoon feeling this low, so I freshened up in the restroom and tried to pull myself together. I tried calling Jasper a few times, but he didn't answer. And the longer he ignored me, the more suspicious I got. Something was definitely off. Then my phone rang. It was Sierra. Now, Sierra almost never calls me directly unless she's trying to reach Jasper, so I figured that was the case. I answered to let her know he'd call back. But instead of asking for Jasper, she started grilling me, asking where I was, what part of the airport I was in, whether I was near a specific cafe or lounge. I was already frustrated from everything that had happened, and I had zero patience left for her games. So I straight up asked her what she really wanted. She paused, then said, in her usual smug tone, that I shouldn't get so worked up, she was just letting me know she was coming along on the honeymoon too. That's when I snapped. I actually yelled into the phone, asking if she was seriously joking. But no, Sierra was dead serious. She said she just wanted to be close to Jasper and didn't like the idea of him flying so far away from her. So she had convinced him to let her join us on our honeymoon. At that point, I was livid. I ended the call and marched straight to the business lounge. The security at the door didn't want to let me in, but I explained that my husband was inside and that it was urgent. I had to speak to him about something serious involving his mother, who wasn't picking up my calls. After some back and forth, they finally agreed to escort me inside. And there he was, Jasper, sitting comfortably and scrolling through his phone, which told me everything I needed to know. He had his phone on him the whole time. He'd just been ignoring me. When he looked up and saw me with security, he acted surprised, asking if something was wrong. I asked him straight out if it was true. Was Sierra coming with us on our honeymoon? Jasper froze. I pushed again. Was that why he'd booked our seats separately? So I wouldn't find out? Was he really flying off on our honeymoon with his mommy while I sat alone in economy? He went red in the face. People around us were staring, whispering. Even the security guy looked invested in what was unfolding. And that's when Sierra walked into the lounge. She had this look on her face, like she was scanning the room, looking for Jasper. The moment she spotted us, she stopped in her tracks. I turned to Jasper and told him that his mother had just spilled everything to me over the phone. That's how I knew. Jasper, now completely cornered, tried to explain. He said he had originally booked economy seats for just the two of us, but Sierra kept crying and begging to come. So to keep both of us happy, he decided to split us up, book her separately, keep it a secret, and hope for the best. He even told me he'd booked a whole separate hotel for her, so she wouldn't bother us during the trip. Then Sierra walked right up and, true to form, jumped in with her usual passive-aggressive flair. She looked me in the eye and said I should be grateful. Sierra stood there, right in the middle of the lounge, telling me I should be grateful because her son loved her so much, and what was the big deal if she came along? She said she'd never been this far from him before and just wanted to stay close. I swear, if we hadn't been at the airport, I probably would have lost it right then and there. Instead, I had to hold it together. I raised my voice at Jasper, telling him I was ashamed to be married to a man who couldn't go anywhere without dragging his mommy along. I told him, loud enough for everyone to hear, that he acted more like her husband than her son. He leaned toward me, whispering harshly, begging me not to embarrass him in front of affluent people and saying we could talk about it later, in Hawaii. I laughed right in his face. I told him he could enjoy his romantic getaway with his mother because I was done. Done with the lies. Done with the marriage. Done with both of them. They both just stood there, staring at me in shock as I walked out of the lounge. I didn't care. I tore my tickets in half, booked a cab, and went straight home. Jasper showed up later that day, saying he hadn't gone on the trip either. He started laying into me, saying I had no right to talk to him like that in public. He claimed he was just trying to do what he thought was right, and now Sierra had to fly to Hawaii alone. I locked myself in the bathroom and cried. I didn't want to see his face. I couldn't even look at him. All of this had happened just the day before, and I've been in a daze ever since. I know in my heart that our marriage is over, at least it feels that way. Jasper hasn't apologized. He hasn't tried to talk to me. And honestly, that's what hurts the most. Just days ago, I was excited to build a life with this man. And now, it's like everything shattered in front of me. That's why I came to Reddit. I really need to know, was I wrong for walking away from my husband after he tried to bring his mother on our honeymoon? Update 1. Wow. I didn't expect this kind of response. Thank you to every single one of you who commented or messaged me. I've read through all of it, and so many of you made me feel seen and understood. After thinking it through, I've decided to have one final conversation with Jasper. If he continues to put his mother above our marriage, then I'll have no choice but to end things for good. I just can't live a life where I'm constantly fighting for a place in my own relationship. And Sierra? Honestly, the fact that she still went to Hawaii alone after everything, after causing this entire mess, says it all. I'll update again once we talk. Update 2, 1 month later. A lot has happened since I last posted. After letting things sit for a while, I realized I couldn't keep avoiding this. I needed answers, closure, something. So I packed my bags and waited for Jasper to come home from work, determined to have a real, honest conversation. I wasn't sure if it would fix things or break us completely, but I had to try. When he walked through the door and saw me sitting there, I could see the worry on his face. I offered him a glass of water and asked him to sit down. The room was heavy with tension. We hadn't spoken properly since that day at the airport, and he still seemed to think I owed him an apology. I took a deep breath and laid it all out. I told him everything. How Sierra had made me feel, even from the very beginning of our relationship. How I'd watched him change whenever she was around. How I fell in love with a kind, thoughtful man, but that man would disappear the second she entered the picture. I acknowledged the pain and guilt he carried because of his mom, how much he felt he owed her, how her struggles shaped his behavior. But I also told him how much it had been chipping away at me. At us. I cried through most of it. I told him how hard it had been, how isolated I felt when Sierra hijacked our wedding, our honeymoon, even our everyday lives. I told him I loved him, but I couldn't do this if things didn't change. And to my surprise, he cried too. Jasper broke down. He told me he had no idea I'd been carrying so much hurt. He admitted he'd spent his whole life looking after his mom, always afraid something terrible might happen to her. That guilt had shaped everything. He said he knew bringing her on our honeymoon was wrong, but he felt so manipulated and overwhelmed that he gave in, thinking it would keep everyone happy. I pointed out that if Sierra really cared about him, she wouldn't have flown to Hawaii after everything. She would have stayed behind, given us space. He nodded and said he was finally starting to see it for what it was. Then he dropped to his knees, crying, apologizing over and over. And in that moment, my heart softened. I could see how broken he felt. I hugged him. We both cried. It became clear that Jasper needed professional help. And as long as he was willing to work through it, I was willing to stand by him. In the 2 weeks that followed, Jasper started seeing a therapist. He even sat down with his dad and told him everything. Miles was stunned. He had no idea Sierra had caused so much pain. He backed us completely, telling Jasper it was time to live his life without guilt, without fear, and without letting his mother control him. Jasper decided to go low contact with Sierra. It's been tough, she still calls constantly, but he's planning to talk to her this weekend. If she refuses to respect his boundaries, he says he'll have no choice but to block her. For the first time in a long while, I feel like we're headed in the right direction. Update 3 months later. It's been 3 months since that night at the airport, and I just wanted to say thank you again to everyone who supported me through all of this. It's been a roller coaster, but your kindness really kept me going. Jasper did end up having that conversation with Sierra, and as expected, it did not go well. She exploded, yelled, blamed me for stealing her son, demanded that he divorce me, and insisted everything had been perfect before I came along. But this time, Jasper didn't back down. He told her he wasn't going to tolerate her manipulation anymore. He made it clear, she needed to respect our marriage, or she wouldn't be part of his life. And then, he blocked her number. I did the same. Of course, Sierra started telling anyone who would listen that she'd been abandoned. She spun her version of events, and the gossip made its way back to us. But we stayed strong, focused on rebuilding what we had. Miles has been a huge help. He checks in on Sierra from time to time, making sure she's taking her meds and staying safe. But for us? That chapter is closed. Since cutting off contact, Jasper's anxiety has eased in ways I didn't think were possible. We started going on date nights again without interruptions. We can actually relax and enjoy each other's company. And about that honeymoon, Jasper surprised me. He booked us another trip to Hawaii, just the two of us. This time, we both flew business class, side by side. We finally got the peaceful, romantic getaway we had dreamed of. No drama, no chaos. Just love. We laughed. We swam. We held hands walking down the beach at sunset. And for the first time, I felt truly hopeful about our future. It hasn't been easy. But Jasper is growing. He's still seeing his therapist, and I can see the difference it's making. I finally feel like we're building a life together, not with a third person always wedged in between. And if anything else changes, I'll be sure to share. But for now, I think we're finally okay.